to our last chapter here. We're going to be looking at the male and female reproductive systems. Really on this one, it's the functions of the male and female reproductive systems are pretty straightforward. And really kind of the similar thing on both of them with the exception of the last point here. So both male and female reproductive systems, one of the things they're doing is making the gametes. So in the case of men, this is going to be the sperm cells. In the case of women, it's going to be the egg cells or oocytes. The other thing that the reproductive systems are doing are making the particular sex hormones. In the case of men, this is androgens and testosterone. In the case of women, this is going to be estrogen and progesterone. The last one here is where it's a little bit different. For male reproductive tract is very much just delivery of sperm to the female reproductive tract in order to produce a zygote or a fetus at some point. With women, obviously it's a little bit different on that one. It's going to be reception of that and then housing the embryo / fetus until it's ready for birth. So you can see the last point here is a little bit different on each of them, but really for the rest of it, pretty straightforward. So with the male reproductive system, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the gametes, talk about production of sperm cells, where it's made, and the different parts of the reproductive tract. So one of the things we're going to see right off the bat is the testes are housed within the scrotum, which is pretty much a sack of skin. Main thing on this one, temperature-wise, for sperm cells to be most active and function the best, they need to be produced at about 3 Celsius colder than normal body temperature. And this is part of the reason they are housed outside of the abdominal cavity and not within. We can control this somewhat through changes in a couple of different muscles of the scrotum. So you have what is called the dardos muscle as well as the cremaster muscles with warmer temperatures. Pretty much these muscles relax, allow the testes to get further away from the body. Again, further away from the body means lower body temp influencing this. If it's cold outside, those muscles are going to contract. It helps hold the scrotum closer to the body and will conserve heat to those testes. So again, really depends upon body temp, overall temperature and temperature of the testes. If basically you can kind of think about like an elevator muscle, if the elevator is going to be up or down. And this kind of shows you that cremaster muscle, part of what's called the spermatic cord, but contraction will lift those up and get them closer to the body. We're going to see the testes have 2 connective tissue layers surrounding those. I'm not going to make you identify them, probably won't even ask about them, but these are a couple different connective tissue things here. Again, holding a lot of these tubules that we're going to see in place. And again, it's a lot of tubules. So this shows you a testes. So the big circle there would be the actual testes. The littler circle over to the right is the epididymis, and the arrows are pointing at the couple different connective tissue layers surrounding that. If you're hit hard enough, sometimes those can burst, and that would not be a good thing. The testes, because males and females at least start out with stem cells that can kind of go either direction. They start out in the abdominal cavity. This is part of the reason that we'll get when we get to it, the vas deferens. It actually loops up over the top of the bladder and comes back in behind the bladder. The reason for that is the testes actually start out in the abdominal cavity, about where the ovaries are found in women, but they are guided down by a structure called the gubernaculum to the scrotal sac. And that's one of the things that doctors usually do right after a baby boy is born is make sure both the testes have descended. They can get lost. They can end up in different weird spots, and this is just kind of showing you all the places that sometimes a testes that doesn't migrate correctly can end up. Again, we're not going to worry about that too much. But again, the testes are a bunch of these what are called seminiferous tubules. These are where the sperm cells are being made. There is some cells in between these seminiferous tubules called interstitial or Leydig cells, which are testosterone-producing cells. But what you can see is each of these testes is subdivided into the different lobules here. And each of these lobules are going to have a bunch of these seminiferous tubules, which are continuously pumping out sperm cells. Overall, at one point I looked it up in the book how much was in each lobule. If you were to kind of take all the seminiferous tubules and lay them out end to end between all the lobules in here, it's actually about a 5K of seminiferous tubules that is packaged up in there. It's quite a lot. So you can see the seminiferous tubules are the circles here. And then you can see where the arrow is pointing right there. That is those interstitial cells, which are going to be making the testosterone. We have a lot of ducts within these seminiferous tubules that are going to move it to kind of this little network, or almost like a grand central station of the sperms called the ready testes. This is going to connect all the seminiferous tubules together and provide a pathway for those to get to the epididymis, where it's kind of a staging area. Again, afferent ductules connect the ready testes to the epididymis, again lined with columnar epithelium if we're really worried about that. But it's going to go into the epididymis where the sperm cells are stored until ejaculation were to be to take place. And this is showing you those seminiferous tubules with the different kind of sperm precursor cells up here going down to the center where the mature sperm are going to be formed. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but the whole process takes about a month, where you're having from the stem cells to the actual functional sperm cell. Again, they get the blood from the testicular artery and drained by the testicular vein, but you can see there is this plexus. Again, because we want the temperature to be a little bit colder, we actually have really a countercurrent mechanism in place here, where you have this artery, instead of going straight down, has to wind its way through this plexus of veins, which are going to have colder blood in them. And so the hottest venous blood is going to be right here, but the hottest arterial blood is right here as well. It's going to lose heat here, and as you work your way down, you're coming in contact with colder and colder blood here, which is going to continue to draw heat out of that blood coming down to the testes. So again, countercurrent mechanism again here, but this time trying to act as a way to kind of pull some heat away from the actual testes. Again, a lot of these blood vessels, what is called the vas deferens, as well as nerve supply, blood supply, are all wrapped in that cremaster muscle within some connective tissue called the spermatic cord. There's going to be one spermatic cord kind of holding on to each testis here, or testis, that will allow us to kind of have all that nerve supply and everything else there. And again, with that cremaster muscle, bring these up or lower them down to maintain that temperature. And that is just showing the testes. The epididymis is kind of this comma-shaped structure that is behind each testes. This is going to store in these efferent ductules, and the tail of the epididymis is going to store sperm cells that are going to mature a little bit here and then be pumped out when needed to do what the sperm cells do. Lots of smooth muscle in this, which can trigger peristaltic contractions, which can move this up that vas deferens or ductus deferens. And again, like it says here, about 4 to 5 meters long overall if you look at all the tubule wrapped around in there. So again, lots of tubules wrapped into a small area. And this shows you all those tubules go back and forth. If you look at it histologically, you see a lot of circles, and again, it's because it's this tube that's winding back and forth. And if you were to look in these, you'd actually see spermatozoa in the interior of them. So this is kind of showing you overall here. So far we've talked about the testes and are working away here, but you can see the vas deferens is going to work its way up and actually loops over the bladder. And again, that's because it migrates from up here into this area, which means that it gets looped over the ureters in terms of the vas deferens or ductus deferens. So that epididymis is actually storing the sperm until they're fully mature. When they first get there, they look like mature sperm, but they're not actually mature sperm. And if they get sent out too soon, they will not be functional. Again, too late, they are also not going to be functional, and in some cases will degenerate and can be actually reabsorbed. The ductus or vas deferens is the tubule that is going to move this stuff up through that spermatic cord and to the rest of the reproductive tract. Kind of has a funnel-like structure to it. This enlarged area called an ampulla as it approaches the prostate and is kind of merging together with the ducts from the seminal vesicles, and all together that is going to form what's called the ejaculatory duct. This has pseudostratified columnar epithelium in it, a very muscular wall that can move this stuff up through the reproductive tract and to that ejaculatory duct. And again, because we're not in this serous cavity, it has an adventitia, not a serosa around it. And this is kind of showing you the pathway in each of these. And again, paired, everything is paired until we kind of reach the urethra, and then we're going to have single tubes here. But you can see seminiferous tubules to that ready testes, to the epididymis, up through the vas deferens or ductus deferens to that ejaculatory duct, which is going to merge with the ducts from the seminal vesicles, and then enter through the prostate to the urethra. And at that point, we're using the same tubing as the urinary system to pass the rest of the materials out. And then this is showing you that widening, that ampulla right here. You can see the seminal vesicles on the posterior side of the bottom part of the bladder, just above the prostate. And kind of, again, showing you that spermatic cord and how it works its way up into the abdominal cavity. A lot of times if somebody is to have a hernia, a lot of times it is in that area because that is one of those spots where the muscle is not complete. One of the ways to do birth control here is to do what's called a vasectomy, which is actually taking that vas deferens or ductus deferens and kind of cutting it and tying it off pretty much, or burning it off. All the other function of the reproductive system work fine. You're still making sperm cells. They're just not being able to leave the testicles to actually make their way up through the rest of the reproductive tract. So what you'll have is you'd have an ejaculate that has no sperm cells but everything else in it. So the seminal vesicles, and they don't get really crazy on naming what they make. So the seminal vesicles make seminal fluid. These are these hollow organs here on the back side of the bladder, have a duct that is combining to form that ejaculatory duct with the ampulla of the ductus deferens. Pretty much an alkaline fluid and some sugars and stress hormones. The prostaglandins are going to help open up the cervix in the female. The fructose is nourishment for the sperm cells, because basically what sperm cells are is genetic material strapped to a motor. Outside of that, the alkaline fluid, the female reproductive tract, tends to be more acidic due to lactobacillus, helping to make that environment a little bit more acidic. This alkaline fluid is going to help provide an environment that's a little bit more accommodating to those sperm cells when they enter the female reproductive tract. And again, found on the back side of the bladder, this is what they look like if you were to actually look at the seminal vesicle under the microscope. Again, secreting seminal fluid, which is about 60% of the volume of what we would constitute as semen. That ejaculatory duct is where this is merging together with material from the testicles and is going to open into that prostatic urethra. The prostate gland is a single organ, so there's only one of those. We've had two seminal vesicles, two of everything else so far. There's a single prostate. It secretes a fluid, like it says here, has citric acid, which is helps sperm health. Pretty much the seminal plasmin, which helps keep the urinary tract clean, and something called prostate-specific antigen, which is going to help liquefy that semen after it's in the female reproductive tract so the sperm cells can start swimming to their goal. Prostate gland, like it says here, is on the inferior side of the bladder. The urethra travels right through it. It's making about 30% of the contents of semen. So the testicles are doing about 10%, 60% for the seminal vesicles. That gives you what is the recipe for what is going to be coming out here. And you can see here's the prostate. You can see the urethra right here. Again, if you wanted to know the histology of this, I'm not really going to show you the histology of this stuff too much, but this is actually showing you the histological structure of the prostate gland. Other glands that are present here are the bulbourethral glands, or sometimes called the Bulbourethral glands. They produce a mucus prior to ejaculation that is going to help cleanse the urethra beforehand. And you can see these are, again, paired glands structures right there. Again, pretty much mucus prior to ejaculation to flush out the urethra. And again, to remind you that fluid helps to create an environment that is going to be safer for the sperm cells. Again, somewhat of a hostile environment these sperm cells are traveling into. I mean, to me, anytime that you have to send in 200 million to get one to its goal, kind of a hostile environment. So all said and done, this is what constitutes semen, and it's going to pretty much protect the sperm cells, activate them, and transport them to the female reproductive tract. So next one here we'll talk about is really the rest of the male reproductive tract, and then we'll move on to the female reproductive tract.